The day Windows stopped being default, what if the biggest PC maker in the world just decided Windows is no longer standard, not removed, not replaced, but turned into something you only get if you pay extra? Because that's exactly what's beginning to happen. And for Microsoft, this isn't just a bad headline. This is a direct threat to the system that made them dominant for over 30 years. For decades, Microsoft didn't need to win users over. They didn't need to compete aggressively. They didn't need to convince you that Windows was better, because by the time you turned on your computer, the decision had already been made. Windows was already there, pre-installed, ready, waiting. You didn't choose Windows, you accepted it. And that single advantage, being the default, built one of the most powerful monopolies in tech history. But today, that advantage is starting to collapse. Not because of Apple, not because of some revolutionary new OS, but because the very companies that helped Microsoft dominate the world are now quietly walking away. Before we dive deeper, check the description for more context and sources, because this shift is bigger than it looks. Let's break it down. The invisible strategy. Microsoft's real strength was never just Windows itself, it was distribution. Instead of convincing billions of users individually, Microsoft focused on a few key partners: Lenovo, HP Dell, Asus. If these companies installed Windows on every device, Microsoft automatically controlled the entire market, and it worked flawlessly. Because most people don't reinstall operating systems. They don't explore alternatives. They simply use whatever is in front of them. This is called the default effect, and it's incredibly powerful. But while users didn't think twice about it, manufacturers were quietly paying the price, the economics no one talks about. Let's look at the real numbers behind a simple laptop. Imagine a $400 device, something affordable, something millions of people buy. Out of that $400, around $50 to $80 goes straight to Microsoft for the Windows license. Another $30 to $50 is added because of Windows 11 hardware requirements. Now suddenly over $100 is gone before the company even starts making profit. And that's just the visible cost. There are hidden costs too: engineering constraints, limited component choices, reduced flexibility in design. Manufacturers don't just pay money, they lose control over how they build their own products. For years they accepted this, because they believed they had no choice. But then came the bigger issue, the one that changed everything: the post-sale problem. When the real damage doesn't happen when the laptop is built, it happens after it's sold. Windows brings with it a long list of problems: automatic updates that sometimes break features, pre-installed trial software that annoys users, background processes that slow performance, notifications, ads, and upsells inside the OS. For everyday users, this creates frustration. And when users get frustrated, they look for help. But they don't call Microsoft. They call the laptop manufacturer. So now companies are dealing with increased support calls, longer troubleshooting times, higher operational costs, and in many cases, returns. A returned laptop isn't just a refund, it's a loss. It has to be processed, repackaged, and resold, often at a lower price. Multiply that across millions of devices, and suddenly Windows isn't just expensive. It's a liability. The quiet experiment. At some point, one manufacturer decided to test a simple idea. What happens if we remove Windows? No big announcements, no bold claims, just a controlled experiment. They released a batch of laptops with Linux instead of Windows. Same hardware, same pricing, only one difference. The results were surprising. Return rates dropped sharply. Support calls decreased dramatically. Customers reported smoother performance. And here's the most fascinating part. Customers believed the laptop itself was better, not the OS, the hardware. Even though nothing had changed except the software. That's when manufacturers realized something critical. Windows wasn't helping their product, it was hurting it. The shift in strategy. After seeing real-world data, the decision became clear. Instead of treating Windows as mandatory, manufacturers started treating it as optional. Now the model looks different. Linux becomes the default. Windows becomes an add-on. Users must actively choose it. This flips decades of industry behavior. For the first time, users are forced to make a decision, and when people are asked to choose, they start questioning things they never questioned before. Microsoft's countermove. Microsoft saw the shift happening, and they reacted quickly. They offered large discounts to manufacturers, trying to make Windows cheaper to keep. But something unexpected happened. The offer didn't solve the problem, because price wasn't the core issue anymore. Even at a lower cost, Windows still caused higher support volume, more returns, lower customer satisfaction. At that point, manufacturers weren't asking, how cheap is Windows? They were asking, is Windows worth it at all? And for the first time in decades, the answer wasn't obvious. A coordinated industry move. This isn't just one company making a bold move. Multiple manufacturers are now exploring the same direction. They're expanding Linux offerings, testing new configurations, reducing reliance on Windows, and they're doing it carefully. Because if only one company changes, they risk losing support from Microsoft. But if several companies move together, Microsoft can't push back without hurting itself. This creates a rare moment in tech history, a coordinated shift away from a dominant platform. Perfect storm for change. The timing of this shift is critical because it aligns with growing user frustration. When Windows 10 reached end of life, millions of users were forced to decide, upgrade to Windows 11, buy new hardware, or switch to something else. And many hesitated. Windows 11 introduced changes that didn't sit well: strict hardware requirements, mandatory online accounts, increased system control, built-in AI features. For some users, it felt like they lost ownership of their own device. And once that feeling appears, loyalty disappears. Linux's second chance. For years, Linux wasn't a real competitor in the consumer space. It was powerful, but not accessible. That's changed. Today, many Linux distributions are easy to install, user-friendly, visually polished, compatible with most everyday tasks. For millions of users, Linux is now good enough. And in markets, good enough plus cheaper is incredibly powerful because most people don't need advanced features. They just want something that works. The developer shift. There's another layer to this story. Developers, the people who build software, are slowly moving away from Windows. Why does that matter? Because platforms are only as strong as the software built for them. If developers prefer other systems, the ecosystem begins to shift. And once the ecosystem shifts, the platform loses long-term relevance. This is a slow change, but a very powerful one. The AI gamble. At the same time, Microsoft is betting heavily on AI. They've invested billions into AI tools, integrations, and infrastructure. They're trying to redefine Windows as more than just an operating system, an intelligent assistant, an automated environment. But here's the problem. Not everyone wants that, especially businesses, because an operating system that acts unpredictably is a risk. Instead of solving problems, it introduces new uncertainties, and that makes some users even more open to alternatives. The real threat. This isn't about Linux versus Windows. It's about something bigger: the loss of the default. For 35 years, Microsoft didn't have to fight for users. Now they do, and competing is much harder than controlling, because now users compare options, manufacturers evaluate costs, governments question control. Everything becomes a decision. What happens next? If this trend continues, several things could happen. More laptops ship without Windows. Users become more comfortable with alternatives. Software ecosystems diversify. Windows won't disappear, but it may become just one option among many. And that's a completely different position than where it started. Windows isn't collapsing overnight, but something fundamental has changed. For the first time in decades, it's no longer guaranteed. And that changes everything. Because once the default disappears, the real competition begins. And competition forces something Microsoft hasn't had to do in a long time: win users over. Not through partnerships, not through pre-installation deals, but through actual value, better performance, better experience, better trust. Because now users are more aware than ever. They're questioning what's on their devices. They're exploring alternatives. They're realizing they have a choice. And that shift in mindset is powerful. Because once people start choosing instead of accepting, the entire industry changes. Manufacturers change, software changes, even user expectations change. And the biggest question now is, if Windows isn't pre-installed, will people still choose it? Or was the default the only thing holding it up? And this was the day Windows stopped being default. There are plenty more massive shifts happening in tech right now, so if you know another one worth covering, let us know in the comments. We would appreciate it if you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dive content like this. See you in the next one.